Hello, my name is Dr. Jacqueline Ranishek, and I'm with DTP-Leadership Group, and this is Hot Topic Bold Talk. I hope that you will really appreciate this evening because I'm going to try to present all the things that I think show a pattern of behavior that is so frustrating and so ridiculous. But at the same time, we have to learn how to deal with it. And there are lots of ways to learn how to deal with it. So that's what my job is this evening, is to be able to tell you the stories and then say, this is what I think as citizens we can truly do. So I'll do my best to discuss it with you and give you the various points that I think are really important to do. So I just want to say good day to all of you and welcome to podcast 177. It's titled Call It Out. When corruption becomes policy, silence is not an option. Now, today's podcast begins with a sentence from one of the articles I read this week. To be silent is to forfeit. To be silent is to forfeit. So that sentence stayed with me for a while, and it perfectly describes the moment I think we as Americans are in. This week I read lots of articles. One was about January 6th police officers suing the Trump administration. Another involved tax claims against Trump and his family. Another focused on executive orders affecting voting rights. Another described lawsuits from states trying to stop harmful federal policies around healthcare. Another covered threats against late-night television hosts. And another focused on the electricity costs and the economic pressure that all of us as ordinary Americans are facing. So yeah, they're all different topics, but they all have different headlines, but they have different consequences for us. And underneath every story was the same pattern. Powerful people testing how much corruption, dishonesty, intimidation, and abuse the public will tolerate before citizens finally say, it's enough. You're not going to do this anymore. And equally important, these stories really show Americans refusing to stay quiet because there are police officers suing, states suing, establishing and filing lawsuits, journalists exposing deals that we as a public need to know about, watchdog groups demanding records that show what's going on. Election officials are fighting back in several states. Comedians refusing to be intimidated, citizens organizing. And that is what today's podcast is about. It's not an abstract theory that I'm going to be presenting. It's not a slogan. It's not partisan politics. It's the actual stories unfolding right in front of you and me, stories that show how citizens identify corruption. They're educating others about what is happening, and then persisting in the fight against dishonesty and abuse of power. Corruption survives best in darkness. It depends on exhaustion. It depends on confusion. And it depends on people saying, I'm too tired, nothing happens. Why should I bother doing anything? I'll bet you've said that a few times. But every one of the articles we discussed today shows people are bothered and they are speaking out. They're suing, they're documenting, they're refusing to be silent. So today, let's walk through these stories carefully. Understanding what really happens when people take that first step and say, I'm fighting about this. I'm not putting up with this anymore. So the first thing I want to talk about is the $1.8 billion fund that's supposed to reward the insurrectionist. It's an $1.8 billion fund that's supposed to reward the insurrectionists because of a deal that Trump made with the IRS. Well, let's begin by me telling you what's happening. The Conversations is one of the best articles I read on a weekly basis. They write wonderful materials, and they're very straightforward in their research. And so the titles of theirs was, Your Taxes Could Pay January 6th Rioters and Other Trump Allies for What They Did. Your tax dollars could pay because of this deal he made with the IRS. You would be paying January 6th rioters and other Trump allies that have done corruption and everything else, but you'll be paying them. And they'll be giving, so that's what it is. It's about this ridiculous slush fund. But let's pause for a moment. We're not talking about conspiracy theories. We're not talking about rumor. We're not talking about internet gossip. We're talking about serious publications by excellent resources that are saying your tax paying dollars could be used to compensate people who are connected to January 6th. Now, this article explains that the Justice Department announced a massive compensation fund described as, quote, a lawful process for victims of lawfare and weaponization. Now, we know who's created that story into something that's not true. But listen to the language being used. Victims of lawfare. That phrase matters because language is how political movements reshape reality, and we're living with it every day since Trump has become president. The people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th were prosecuted because they committed many crimes. Courts found them guilty, and juries reviewed evidence. Police officers were assaulted, windows were slashed, lawmakers fled for their safety. But these people are supposed to now get paid because they were victims? That's the language change. Instead of criminals, they become victims. Instead of accountability for their actions, they have become weaponized against. And this is how corruption works. It rewrites what really happened, so our memory changes. And once memory is rewritten, accountability disappears. I've seen it too many times. The New York Times expanded this story further when it reported that 2 January 6 police officers have sued to stop the administration's proposed $1.8 billion slush fund. Think about the cruelty embedded in that situation. These officers defended our Capitol. There were officers beaten, threatened, traumatized, and permanently changed by that day. Now they're going to be forced to fight again because public money may be used to reward people that were connected with the very attacks they endured. According to the Times, the officers described their proposal as a slush fund. You've probably heard that before, but the phrase really means that a slush fund is money controlled politically, often without transparency, accountability, or a legitimate public purpose. So public citizens described it even more bluntly. It's a $1.8 billion slush fund to mega criminals, crooks, and cronies. Yeah, they're strong words, but that's what it is. Sometimes strong words are necessary because the soft language that they're using can normalize dangerous behavior. That was very dangerous on January 6th. And that if we normalize it, then one of the central themes running through every story you'll hear about today is that danger is not merely corruption itself. The danger is citizens slowly becoming accustomed to corruption. The danger is hearing something outrageous so often that eventually people stop listening. Imagine explaining this situation 20 years from now. Hear this one. See what you think. A sitting president has proposed a compensation fund potentially benefiting individuals connected to an attack on the Congress, and police officers must sue to stop it. I don't know about y'all, but I sit here and I go, oh my God, this is ridiculous. I want to repeat that again so you'll really pay attention, and I want you to think about it. A sitting president has proposed a compensation fund potentially benefiting individuals connected to an attack on the Congress, and police officers must end up suing to stop it. Please imagine that for a moment. Today, when Americans barely have time to absorb one scandal before the next one arrives, that overload is not accidental. Political chaos is exactly what exhausts people, and not only that, encourages citizens to disengage. The Atlantic captured this broader pattern perfectly in an article titled Heads, Trump Wins. The article described how Trump sued his own government for $10 billion of taxpayers' money. The lawsuit was later dropped, but taxpayers still face financial exposure through the creation of a compensation fund. A compensation fund for those individuals that have contributed to being criminals. And the title, Heads, Trump Wins, perfectly summarizes what many Americans increasingly feel. If Trump attacks institutions, he wins. If he delays accountability, he wins. If he settles lawsuits advantageously, he wins. He's a billionaire now. If taxpayers absorb the cost, he still wins. You and I are absorbing the cost of all this stuff he's doing. He's using the Justice Department as his own legal firm. That's what's happening. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens like you and me pay the bills, absorb the instability, and watch public trust erode further because of his behaviors and his followers. And this is where citizens must begin calling things by their proper names. Corruption thrives when people become afraid to describe what they're seeing. If taxpayer money rewards political allies, citizens must say something, and it is time to say something. The various newspapers and other people that are on television and everything are talking about what is happening here because they want us to know so we will stand against it. Because it's not acceptable to have public institutions manipulated to benefit powerful people. We're going to support insurrectionists. I don't think they're victims. I think the police and the Congress that day that fled are the ones that were the victims. So citizens say, okay, here's violence, here's recklessness. Let's be clear about something. January 6th officers have established a lawsuit to get legal challenge for this slush fund. And it is an act on their part of refusal, and we need to stand by them. These officers are refusing to participate in what I call historical revisionism. Historical revisionism. We're living through it every day. These officers are refusing to allow violence against police officers to be rewritten as patriotic suffering. They are refusing silence. And citizens are watching these stories. You and me, we watch these stories and we learn some very important things. Corruption advances gradually. It's not all at once. One legal maneuver, one executive order, one rewritten narrative, one normalization at a time. That is why public attention matters. That is why journalists matter. That is why lawsuits matter. That is why persistence matters. And that is why silence becomes very dangerous. Silence gives dishonest behavior room to grow. And we've seen in the primaries when Republicans speak out against Trump. You've seen those. But it comes a time where we have to stop worrying about the consequences and take a stand because we know what is happening is wrong. To me, that IRS deal that Trump made only shows that powerful people play by different rules. And the New York Times reports it in this way. The Justice Department deal blocks IRS claims against Trump and his family. It isn't just delaying some claims, they have blocked the claims forever. They've been barred, the IRS has been barred and precluded from ever pursuing any IRS claims involving Trump, his children, family members, and business connections. And forever banned? None of the rest of us ever get that. The phrase should consider every one of us citizens, regardless of our political affiliation. We're going to have a person and his family banned from IRS investigations. There is something wrong when you get to that stage that you demand that to such a point. There is something seriously wrong with his IRS behavior. Ordinary Americans like you and me, we would never have this happen to us. We have to deal with the tax system. A regular citizen like you and me owes taxes. The IRS is not casual about walking away and leaving us alone. There are consequences and there are penalties for us. So if you're a middle American, you fall behind, you have consequences, and they're very aggressive with it. Yet a political figure increasingly seems to function inside a completely different structure. No accountability. I'll just escape from what I don't want to deal with. It's time for you and I as citizens to notice it. It is time for even people who do not follow politics closely to understand unfairness when they see it. So talk to your friends that are not listening. Tell them what's going on. They need to understand when the rules appear unequal. They need to understand when wealthy or politically connected individuals receive treatment unavailable to us ordinary citizens. And that perception matters deeply because public trust is fragile. And once people stop believing accountability applies on an equal basis, then cynicism spreads. I've heard it too many times. People say, why should I follow the rules? He doesn't. Why does accountability really apply to me? Because it certainly doesn't apply to anyone below the wealthy level. Why are ordinary citizens pushed and punished while powerful people negotiate immunity from having to accept the consequences? So public citizen raised another sharp question. Why the Trump would want such immunity if they don't have anything to hide? And notice something really important. The question does not declare guilt, it invites scrutiny. And that's exactly what citizens should be doing, not blindly accepting official narratives, not automatically believing politicians, but asking who benefits from this action of his? Who pays? Who escapes consequences? Who receives protection? What precedents are being established with this behavior? Healthy citizenship requires all of us to question what's going on. Dishonest systems are things we need to know and stand up against. And this is where we return to the larger pattern running through all the things I'm going to talk about today in this podcast. The issue is not merely a settlement agreement that Trump did. The issue is normalization. When extraordinary legal protection for political powerful figures becomes routine, it becomes very unequal in our society. You got to keep being shocked because the day you don't is the day you numbed out and you've quit listening. So every time something like this happens, I'm shocked that anybody could live and be that type of human being. I want fairness. I want accountability. And history shows that once citizens lose faith in equal accountability, society becomes deeply unstable. And that's what's happening to us. We are in a real severe state of unstableness in America. And the anger grows quietly, and people working two jobs see billionaires receiving legal protection. Families struggle with medical bills, see wealthy figures avoiding consequences. You and I are paying taxes that come from our paychecks. So we see political elites, not just Trump and the rest of his cronies, negotiating an immunity. Over time, there's nothing that can happen except severe resentment. Because fairness matters to you and to me. And it may be imperfect fairness, but at least we know that people believe the system protects insiders while punishing everyone else. That is social trust erosion. Then the erosion is dangerous because citizens become angry. I'm angry. I don't know how you feel. I don't let my anger eat me up because I do these podcasts so I can talk about it and release some of the things I feel. I'm not going to become hopeless, and I don't want you to either. If citizens believe accountability is impossible, many stop participating, and we have to continue to participate. That is why investigative reporting is so important. So we need to protect our news industry. That is why watchdog organizations like Public Citizen Matters or the Conversation or any of them. And that's why the articles I'm presenting to you matter so much, because we cannot allow changes to happen overnight and not know what's going on. Truth must come forth. Documents must be accumulated. Awareness on yours and my part must be accumulated, and pressure accumulated, and eventually public understanding will come and changes will happen because we'll vote them out of office, or we will stand firmly and forget which party you're in, and we'll vote for the people that are not corrupt. We'll vote for the people that are honest. They support our democracy, and they understand that the elite in our society do not have any reason to have opportunities to avoid their own accountability. I think one of the dangerous myths in politics is the idea that speaking out accomplishes nothing. That is not true. History repeats, and it's proven over time. Every major corruption or scandal exposed in American history involves people who refuse silence. They're journalists, they're whistleblowers, they're investigators, they're citizens like you and me, they're lawyers, they're those officers that are suing and saying, no, this is not acceptable. And there are judges, even though we have difficulties with some of the courts, and particularly the Supreme Court, people know that we can keep talking and keep moving. One of the best articles I read this week is about the American Constitutional Society, and they have a detail of things they're describing about how we need to get people in office that can then nominate people for positions on our courts so that our courts will truly be legal entities. So what happens when you get one of these executive orders about voting rights and they want to silence dissent? Well, another article this week focused on Trump's new executive order related to elections and voting procedures. I live in Texas, but I listen a lot to Maricopa County and Arizona, and I listen to Florida, and I listen to Washington and other states because I know things are happening. And Maricopa County described the executive order, as directing federal agencies to create federally approved voting lists, while also restricting certain forms of mail-in voting. Yeah, that's what's happening in the executive order. And that's the reason it's important for us to pay attention to these things. Because most of us do not spend our free time studying election law. Thank God we have people that do and present us the factual data. You and I are busy. We're living our lives. You're raising your children. You're paying your bills like I am. You're taking care of elderly parents, probably. You're just surviving daily because we have an economic crisis in our country. I talked to a friend of mine that said they would pay $6.50 for a gallon of gas. We are at the height that we were during World War II and some of the other times when there was a major shift in the price of gas. So political systems can become intentionally confusing to try to disconnect us from reality. The article from Arizona, Maricopa County, describes Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fortis filing a lawsuit challenging the executive order. Again, this matters because the story is not simply about attempted restrictions. The story is about resistance. Citizens often feel powerless because media coverage focuses heavily on what powerful people are doing wrong. But these stories are things we can do something about, and we're seeing it. Lawsuits, investigations, court challenges, journalism presenting all this, public education, organizing. All this is important because one of the most dangerous things corruption does is to convince ordinary people they can't fight. And I want you to remember the title of the article I began with. To be silent is to forfeit. Forfeit. To be silent is to forfeit. That means we forfeit our rights. And I have no intention of doing that, and I'm asking you to join me. Let's capture the reality of what it is. Some will argue Donald Trump can't be challenged. Look at the fact that some individuals lost their position in Congress because they challenged him. Well, maybe we need to stand behind those people and say, it happened this time. It doesn't have to continue to happen. The Washington Post reports another article. Trump tries to silence late night host. Now they're mocking him even more. And at first glance, you might dismiss it and say, well, that's about entertainment news. No, it's these these entertainers saying, no, you're not going to futz with us because we're going to tell the truth about what's happening. Authoritarian personalities like Trump frequently target comedians, satirists, artists, and journalists because they want to weaken the political methodology. Humor punctures fear. Mockery challenges power. And that's what our entertainers are doing. And people who really rely on image control often react aggressively when public. Each of us becomes embarrassed. So we ought to be thankful for their efforts. And according to this article, television hosts continued increasing criticism and jokes despite pressure and demands that the network silence them. That matters. Not because comedy alone changes politics, but because intimidation only works when people surrender. And this brings us back again to the phrase, to be silent is to forfeit. Every authoritarian movement attempts to create fear around speaking openly. Sometimes through lawsuits, sometimes through online harassment, sometimes through job pressure, sometimes through threats, sometimes through constant public attack. The goal is to imprison everyone. The goal is to make enough people self-censor voluntarily. And I don't know about you, but I am not going to be self-censored. I've noticed something in many years I've lived and worked in teams and corporations. One brave voice can encourage others. One lawsuit can encourage another. One exposed lie encourages another investigation. This is why truth telling matters far beyond any single article. Every public challenge to dishonesty interrupts the normalization process that could happen if we accept the lies. Every correction matters. Every documentation of facts matters. There have been many times that the public citizen has made certain that things could not be changed on websites and other places. So we still maintain the history of what's happening here. Corruption grows strongest when lies become acceptable background noise. And we are living in that moment. Now, here's the thing. States, courts, and citizens are fighting back. One of the most encouraging patterns inside all this troubled stories I've been telling you is Americans are not simply surrendering. They are resisting by utilizing institutions, courts, elections, and organizing and public pressure. The Washington Post reports that 25 states have sued the Trump administration, saying health workers shortage will worsen with federal loan limits. There are health workers that need loans. If they limit, then we'll have fewer health workers. It's an easy way to kill people off when you don't have the health programs that you need to maintain your citizens. And why would anybody want to do that to the people supposedly they represent? Now, here's some other things this story reveals. States look at federal policy and conclude it will damage health care access by making it harder for people to become doctors, nurses, therapists, and healthcare professionals because they need loans in order to be able to go to school and get that kind of education. So the states have sued, 25 of them. That matters because functioning societies require pushback, and that's what they're doing. They're doing legal challenges on harmful policies that should never move forward and need to be checked. And the truth of it is, without courts, and executive power expands constantly. Without public scrutiny, corruption deepens. And once again, ordinary citizens should notice what's really important. These lawsuits are acts of persistence. The people filing them know that changes need to be made and they need to be done now. They know courts are slow, but they know headlines will not fade if they keep fighting. This persistence is what I think we all need to respect, because we need to stop underestimating ourselves. Corruption depends on us getting exhausted, but dishonest leaders often flood the market with so much controversy, as he's been doing throughout his presidency. Citizens become emotionally numb. We need to stop being numb. What I know is, though, continually we have seen people engaging and establishing counter moves. One investigation after another does something, one article after another, one election after another, and slowly public awareness grows. And as the American Constitutional Society message says, what recent court decisions reveal is that courts matter. When the Supreme Court destroyed the Civil Rights Act, Section 2, it matters. You're seeing it. You're seeing the game playing and the inappropriate actions of changing representation when they have no right to do it. It has massive implications. And courts decide whether voting restrictions survive. I think it's fascinating that the Supreme Court would not respect the Democratic leaders in Virginia who have a vote of that state to not gerrymander. Unfortunately, like in many places, their Supreme Court in Virginia is controlled by MAGAs, Republicans. And so the Supreme Court has done the same. Courts do decide whether executive power has limits. Courts decide whether corruption faces consequences. Courts decide whether civil rights protection exists and it's intact. And that is why judicial appointments matter so much. That is why legal institutions continue warning citizens about the court decisions. That's the reason that Richard Wilson and I continue every month to show you in one of my podcasts what's going on in the courts. And we need to read the things from the American Constitutional Society because they list all the possibilities of getting rid of some of these mega Republicans that are on the courts that are not legally interpreting the law or the Constitution. So one of the things we need to realize is anytime we narrow protection, like the Supreme Court decision on the Civil Rights Act of Section 2, we weaken the safeguard. We have a very racist society. To think, like Robert did, that we no longer need to protect is foolish. Look at the southern states and what they've done. They weakened the safeguard. I wonder what people would say years later when they suddenly see what changes have been made in this administration. And what will they say about us who were participants? Did we defend the system? Clarity of what the facts are brings accountability. And I'm going to talk to you about someone that has risen to political power in Texas. Gina is narrowing the Greg Abbott's lead in Texas, and it's an important story. Her campaign message is this: Texans are tired of Abbott's leadership. She's being talked about. She's being supported. And whether people agree politically or not, the broader lesson matters that political movement changes when citizens keep organizing. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not magical, but it's gradual. And the more we have conversations, the more people begin to realize what's happening. And eventually, the political landslide shifts. This is the reason that corruption fears citizen engagement. Because see, if informed citizens like you and me connect the patterns, and that's something I really appreciate doing for you, is to show you very different topics. They have the same pattern. Because you begin to notice how economic pressure, political intimidation, weakened accountability, and public dishonesty reinforce each other. And that's what every one of these stories has. And once enough people recognize these patterns, political narratives begin to weaken. That process is already visible across many, many, many of these stories I'm telling you today. Police officers refusing historical revisionism. They're suing because they don't think a slush fund ought to pay criminals who acted out on January 6th. Election officials challenging executive orders, like Maricopa County, the governor there. Election officers challenging states suing over harmful policies that relate to health care. Journalists documenting legal protection for powerful figures. Citizens argue around economic pressure. Comedians refuse to be intimidated, and each action alone is not small. Together, they form the resistance. And that resistance really matters because corruption becomes dangerous when people feel isolated, and you are not isolated. There are loads of us in America know what's going on. We need to remind ourselves of persistence. I had the opportunity to go to a Pearland Chamber meeting today, and the outgoing mayor happens to be Republican, but I have a lot of respect for him because Cole was there, and he had a chat with the new incoming mayor, who's a Democrat. And it's been years since a Democrat has held that position. But both men talked about so many issues and so many things that build Pearland and how it's important for us all to work together. Pearland is recognized as the top city to live in Texas, the third in the United States, and it's listed 11th as one of the most safe places to live. And I saw today what can happen when people care more about their community than some political things that they believe in and believe in the humanity of all human beings. And it was amazing to watch it. So I want to talk about how corruption arrives at your kitchen table. I think one of the most important articles I read this week is from Epic Times. By the way, it's a conservative group of people. But I read Epic Times because they discuss the electricity costs and the political pressure hitting us getting into or heading into the elections coming in November. The article observed the following. A voter's electricity bill is about as local an issue as we can get. So when my electric bill is so high due to the decisions made on the national level by a president and a controlled Congress, then it's an issue for me and you. So a voter's electricity bill is about as local as an issue we can get. So the sentence matters enormously because political corruption often sounds abstract until people feel it personally. Court cases can feel distant. Legal settlements can feel distant. Executive orders can feel distant. But raising bills are not distant. Healthcare shortages are not distant. There are many people in America today that are not covered due to the decisions that have been made. Higher taxes are not distant. Economic instability is not distant. And eventually, citizens begin connecting these pressures to the broader political behavior of the people that think they have the power to do this, to impact it, each one of us this way. When corruption protects insiders, ordinary people absorb the cost. When accountability weakens, public trust weakens. When institutions are manipulated politically, services deteriorate. And when policy becomes centered around loyalty instead of competence, inefficiency spreads. And eventually, families feel it financially. This is why authoritarian movements, no matter how aggressive they are, they try to control the narrative. And that's what's been going on. Economic pressure creates vulnerability. It creates more fear. It creates more exhaustion, creates misinformation. But let's face the reality. Healthcare shortages affect us today. Energy policies affect our monthly bills. Tax arrangements affect public revenue. Somebody's going to have to pay for Trump's not being investigated again by the IRS. Voting restrictions affect representation. Courts' decisions affect rights. None of this remains abstract forever. It eventually lands directly in yours and my life, and that's what's happening. People stop seeing corruption as entertainment. They stop seeing it as a political theater, which Trump has always tried to create. And they begin recognizing it as something affecting their community, schools, their healthcare, their finances, their future, and the systems that they depend on. When we recognize that, it becomes very powerful because once citizens understand what corruption is doing, they become far harder to manipulate through distraction. So I want to call us out and say, today we walk through many stories. A proposed $1.8 billion compensation fund potentially benefiting January 6 allies. Police officers suing to stop that. IRS claims blocked through sweeping legal agreements, executive orders affecting voting systems, but Arizona is going to speak out and several others will. Late night hosts refusing intimidation, states suing, 25 of them suing over healthcare policy, election officials challenging constantly, and economic pressure hitting ordinary citizens. The Democratic governors constantly combine together to fight various things. Sometimes even Republican governors support the Democratic governors with some of the things that are happening. So they're all different stories, but they are the same pattern. It's a power testing limits, and we as citizens need to respond. Throughout all these stories, I want to continue to echo my comment. To be silent is to forfeit. That is a lesson that we do not want to learn. So I'm not panicked, I'm not hopeless, and I'm not surrendering. But I am going to have clarity, and I'm going to do my best to do that for you every week in Hot Topic Bold Talk. I'll name as honestly as I can. I'll quote the evidence directly. I'll continue to educate you and to provide the support that I know need to do to fight back. And most important, you will never see me give up. I will persist. I don't know if y'all remember this, but I broke 6 bones. And I didn't fail to give you a podcast, even though I was in a lot of pain. Because my message to you is I am going to be here and I'm going to keep saying the truth that counters the lies. Corruption depends a lot, heavily, on fatigue. Dishonesty depends on confusion, and we're not going to be intimidated. I'm delighted that every journalist documents give us the facts that matter. Every lawsuit matters. Every investigation matters. Every conversation you and I have matters. Every person refusing normalization of corruption matters. And history has repeated itself and proven many, many times. Corruption survives longest when people stop paying attention, when they stop organizing, when they stop asking questions. So every week I ask myself, what are the questions that I see in all this data? How do I choose a topic that I can show people what is happening? Because there are police officers that are refusing to be silent. There are states refusing silence. There are journalists refusing silence. There are watchdog groups refusing silence. There are comedians that are refusing silence. It is showing all of us to refuse silence and that refusal really matters. Once corruption becomes visible, citizens have a responsibility to expose it, to explain it, and then could continue to fight it long after the headlines fade. So I want to thank you for listening to me this evening and hearing podcast 177. I want to call you out and say, when corruption becomes policy, silence is not an option, and that's where we are. So until next time, please read carefully what is going on. Ask questions. You can write me questions, and I'll be happy to research them and give them to you. Find that you're reading more so you can quote the evidence and educate others, and never underestimate the power of persistent citizens like you and me, willing to call corruption exactly what it is. It is unacceptable. Thank you. And if you would like to support me, you can look and see about supporting me on Patreon. But if you're listening to me and you're doing that kind of support, I greatly appreciate it, because I can see that the people that are listening to me is growing every week. Thank you for supporting me in that way as well.